All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Adams van Staden, or Conscious Caracal, here to shine a light on the goings on here at the southern tip of Africa, specifically what's going on under the South African government. And we're going to be talking a bit more on a policy level here tonight. And joining me for tonight's conversation, firstly, the title is How Many Race Laws Does the South African Government Have? This is not a new topic. This is something that I've discussed many times on this channel. I've written extensively on it. Also, my guest tonight has written extensively on it. But as I always keep reiterating, I'll continue to create sources of good information until it has sunken in, until it has become common sense for everyone to know these facts. So you can't repeat good information enough. So tonight's going to be re-exploration of the fundamental question that is in the title. How many race laws does South Africa have? And joining me for that tonight is Martin van Staden. He's been recently on the channel before when we talked about specifically race-based collective guilt in regards to the apartheid era and today. Was a fascinating conversation. I know my audience really liked it. And if you haven't watched it yet, you can, after this, go watch it on my channel. And Martin, let's just start off first with your own overview. Where are you currently using your expertise, and what type of work are you keeping busy with at the moment for those that don't know?
Yeah, thanks, Ernst. It's great to be back. So this year started as complete chaos for me, I think for you and for many others. And it's basically calcified or solidified for me that 2025 is going to be the year of expropriation of health compensation and race law for me. Various other bits and bobs that float around, but that really is the core of what I'm doing. It's a very interesting moment for South Africa, and I think those two issues, I think for AfriForum and other organizations, farm murders are now in the spotlight. But in addition to farm murders, confiscation of private property and racialized policymaking. I think that's kind of the trifecta of the current moment in South Africa. So my energies are very much focused on private property rights and racial discrimination in legislation.
And as I've introed the show up with the idea that I think we constantly just have to be using our energy to be creating sources of good quality information that others can use in this. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to call it an information war that's going on. A lot of propaganda out there. I mean, the ANC's propaganda machine has been awakened in 2025, but I mean, with good reason. It is under a serious assault, serious critical and skeptical assault. People asking very uncomfortable questions of the race mad regime, or rasmalheid, as we say in Afrikaans. But Martin, you've touched on it now, but maybe for those that don't know, the Index of Race Law, what is its mission, and what's the context within which it was set up?
Yeah, so just briefly, I kind of wear two hats in my broad policy work on these two topics of EWC and race law. For EWC, I primarily do that in my capacity as head of policy at the Free Market Foundation, and then a very closely allied organization that shares the same values as the South African Institute of Race Relations, which since 1929, that's almost a century ago, has had one of its kind of main topics, or one of its main focuses in work, is identifying the racialized policy making and specifically legislating of the government. So throughout the apartheid era, the IRR published various books and its annual South African survey or survey of race relations that had the bulk of these thick books were dedicated to identifying legislation that effectively made your melanin content, the thing that either makes your skin appear black or either appear light pink, relevant against or in your favor. And the Index of Race Law is part of the IRR's Race Law project, and that is part of that tradition. So it came in the very distant wake of various debates that were held in South Africa, let's say in the early 2010s, I think, maybe late 2000s, where some people like Elon Musk, but I think others as well, started saying something along the lines of there are more race laws in South Africa today than during apartheid. And this caused huge uproar, huge debate, and people said, no, that's impossible. Of course, you're lying. It can't be. And I mean, intuitively, I would also have agreed, no, probably not. Apartheid probably had more race laws than we had today. And
And
this
just
debate kind
sorry
of.
to interrupt you, Martin, a small piece of context there. There would not, at that time, if I remember correctly, there was not some central source that you could then go look up or reference to see actually, well, who's right in regards to how many race laws there are. There were various claims. I know James Myberg of Politics Web had done his own research into how many race laws there were. Other organizations have also, some other claims were floating around, but there was no central place where you could actually then go say, well, this is a binary question, yes or no. Firstly, how does South Africa have race laws or not? And then after that question is settled, the next question is, well, if there are, then how many are there?
No, exactly. And I found this jarring. I mean, South Africa, even before the Union was formed, the Boer republics, the English colonial regimes here, these entities were things that we knew had race laws. And I was always kind of stunned by the fact that there had not been, by one of our universities, the leading anti-apartheid universities like WITS, UCT, etc., that there had not been some kind of initiative to catalog race laws, even if only just for the apartheid era. So the Nelson Mandela Foundation had a very sparse list of, I think, 20, 30, 40 apartheid era race laws. And when I kind of discovered this, I was like, that can't be right. And then, of course, Dr. James Myberg and Professor 𝘭𝘢𝘶𝘥𝘦 in the kind of post-apartheid era also had their lists, and it was also around those numbers. And I felt something's missing. And then I embarked on this, and I wasn't alone initially, so I had some other research assistants. Embarked on just a very simple project, collating from the formation of the South African Parliament in May of 1910 every single act that it has adopted that makes a legal subject's race relevant. Now, it's important to note the baseline here. At common law, your race is not relevant. When you take away governments as we know them, there is still law. Law exists as an organic human phenomenon. Your race is not relevant to law. For your race to be relevant, a body, a legislature, must make it relevant. So the baseline is race is legally irrelevant necessarily. So I went about checking to what degree has it been made relevant, or not to what degree, but rather to what kind of extent in the statute book has it been made relevant. And this was very tedious. It was, I would say, very hard work to get the information together, but it was ultimately a very simple exercise. You look at every act of parliament that parliament has ever adopted, and you identify provisions that make race relevant. It's not always explicit. Sometimes it's implicit, but strongly implicit. Since 1910 up to the present, when legislation from the 1980s refers to community development, that refers to colored areas of mixed race people. That was the convention. When you read about national affairs or national states, that refers to the constitutional law effectively of the Bantustans, the black homelands. So you have to look at euphemistic use of language. And in the post-apartheid era, you have words like transformation, which are courts. I mean, people, when I tell them I have to read race into transformation and historically disadvantaged and so on, people are like, well, you can't do that. Well, our courts do that. That's what the courts say. Our courts read these laws as such. And there's consensus, at least there was until earlier this year, there was consensus that these words are racial and that these laws create either legal advantages or disadvantages or any kind of relevance. So we went about at the IRR creating this comprehensive list. And again, I must emphasize that the possibility of mistake is always there. I am not omniscient or anything like that. There's always the possibility of having missed something or of it accidentally having included something that should not have been included. So we have an open door transparency policy. If you find a mistake, let us know. It will be fixed. And we have been let know about mistakes, and all those mistakes have been fixed. But we now have this list, and I am relatively sure, I am quite certain, in fact, that this list of acts of parliament that make legal subjects race relevant is basically comprehensive and basically complete. There is a lot of work still to be done of zooming in on details, but currently we have a situation where since 1910, the South African Parliament has adopted 319 acts of parliament that make your race relevant in some way, any way. Of those, 117 have been adopted by the post-apartheid government, at least as standalone acts. There's a few acts that have retroactively racialized old apartheid-era laws, so there's a few more than 117. And taken as a whole, of all the race laws ever adopted in South Africa since 1910, 142 remain operative today, and of those, 9 have been deracialized. So that's an important note. Some of them have been deracialized, but of all the race laws ever adopted, 142 still sit on the book as laws that are in force. And again, this is just the latest manifestation of a century-old work that the IRR has done, and it's important for people to know, for South Africans to know, that the law does in fact make how you look physically, how you appear physically, a legally relevant fact. It's important to know that, and it's important for foreigners, for people who want to invest in this country, to know that it's not just about what you do. It's not just about how you invest. It's not just about complying with the law. It's about how you look. It's about how the people on your board look. And it's about how the beneficiaries of your corporate social investment look. It is about how they were born. This is important stuff that needs to be known. And I don't think the gaslighting that we've been experiencing since the start of this year is going to change that. These are facts and they need to be out there.
And Martin, when it comes to how race laws operate, I mean, there's one detail that's incredibly critical to any race regime, and that is racial classification. Now, when it comes to South Africa, maybe our domestic listeners here in South Africa knows how classification in South Africa works, but maybe for our more international audience, can you just explain, does the government in South Africa have legal definitions for black, white, colored, Indian, the categories that we still have that was just copy and pasted from the apartheid era, or is it more of a kind of a wishy-washy, fuzzy business when it comes to these terms? How does it work?
Unfortunately, it's complicated, and I think it being complicated is part of why it's so dangerous and why the government likes it that way. But effectively, we can trace all of this back to, let's say, the pre-1950s. In those days, the word native, European, non-European, these were words that were widely used in our law. There was no definition for what these things meant. The principle was, you will know it when you see it. And to some degree, that's true. You will know a white person when you see them. You will know a black person when you see them. So that is true to a degree. But when the National Party came to power in 1948 and from there on in, they understood at some level that they're serious about their racial engineering project. So they need to define what it is that they're doing. So in 1950, they adopted the Population Registration Act. And that divided South Africa formally into 4 categories, and every few years, every 2 decades or so, those categories were renamed to something else, but effectively they are white, black, colored, and Indian. That is the base, basically, of racial classification up to this day. In 1991, the Population Registration Act was formally repealed. So the system of racial classification and the infrastructure of it, where you have census, you had officers in the Census Bureau who had an office with a window and a door where people came in and they were determined what race they were. There was an infrastructure of racial classification. That came crashing down in 1991 when the Population Registration Act was repealed and not replaced. It was not replaced by anything. So then that was gone. Now we had what you would call kind of a return to the you'll know it and you see it phase, because we still had race laws at that time, and at no point had South Africa had fewer than, I think, 52 race laws since kind of the apartheid era. So in 1998, the Employment Equity Act was adopted. This is one of the core fundamental race laws in South Africa today. What it did was it had a provision for black people. That's a definitional element in it. Black people. Black people refers to Africans, Indians, and coloreds. By implication, anything that does not fall under those three words is not a black person, and therefore does not benefit under whatever classification that thing operates. Now, there's no infrastructure that came with that. I can't go to the Department of Home Affairs and ask them to tell me what race I am. The guy there is going to tell me I'm white, but he has no legal authority to tell me that. So he's just going to thumbsuck it. So there's no system of racial classification. It's basically, you'll know it when you see it. And we are racially classified. One of the fact checkers, the vibe checkers, said that there's no racial classification in South Africa. There is racial classification in South Africa. It is just a very unformalized, very casual, and very kind of open-ended system of classification, whereby the constitutional principle of definition and certainty and so on does not apply. So what we have in South Africa today is a you know it and you see it racial classification, and that carries punishment if you lie. So understand this. There is no
I think this is such an important point, again, especially for our foreign listeners. If I were to go to apply for a job that says pretty much that only non-whites can apply, whites need not apply, and I fill in my form and my application, and I say, well, I'm black, it's not just going to be a little innocent mistake. There might be some legal repercussions for me.
It's fraud. That would be fraud. And if you commit it against the government so under the Employment Equity Act, under the BEE Act, under procurement laws, when you bid for a government contract, you have to fill like boxes upon boxes of papers, documents have to go to the state where you declare certain things about race. And if you lie about that, that would be a criminal offense. You could go to prison for that. You can sit in a cell next to rapists and murderers. You can go to prison for that. But of course, you can be fined to the tune of I think in some cases, it's 10% of the annual turnover of your company. You can be fined as an individual. But this always based on something that is not legally defined. Like I see someone says that you can tick African, and I agree. We're all African. We are per definition African. And a minister a few years ago actually admitted as much, but he said, of course, no, you have to kind of take our history into account. But the fact is, there is no legal definition for what black is. There is no legal definition for what white is. And there is, as the left, I think, rightly pointed out during the previous century, is that race is a social construct to a very large degree, because the lines are blurred between when you stop being a white person and when you become a colored, and when you stop being a colored, when you become black. There is no clear definition for that. And the way our government has chosen to overcome that very important challenge, if you care about the rule of law, is to just pretend that it doesn't exist. And then you don't have really a state of constitutionalism, because Elon Musk is kind of a good example. He's an African American by definition. So him kind of trying to invest in South Africa, what is that? Who is Cyril Ramaphosa to tell him that he is not African or that he is not black? We live in a brave new world where people who are born male say that they are female, and the government and governments around the world and doctors around the world say that that is correct. You are born female, but you're male now, or you're born male and you're female. But somehow, if you're pale skinned like you and me, and we say no, but we're black, somehow that you cannot do. That's against the law. So this is a chaotic wasteland of jurisprudence when it comes to racial classification. The only saving grace here is that it is obvious. It is obvious, more or less, when someone is a given race. But if this were if South Africa wasn't as diverse, if you had to try and discriminate between Zulus and Xhosas and Vendas and so on, you would need a definition, because you wouldn't be able to pull it off. And the only reason they can pull it off is because it's obvious to the eye, and that's part of the iniquity of it. That in history, persecution has often happened to highly successful and visible minorities. And once you weaponize someone's visibility against them, I mean, you're just per definition engaging in persecution and oppression. And if you're weaponizing someone's visibility in their favor, like Black South Africans are ostensibly benefiting from this system, you're just engaging in rent seeking, and none of these things are good.
And I think also something that's a point of absurdity, one example that really points to how absurd it is when you don't have a legal definition for Black, but laws are dependent on that concept, is the fact that in South Africa, descendants, South Africans of Chinese descent qualify for Black economic empowerment legislation or benefits.
Exactly. Yeah, the High Court in Pretoria, I think, a few years ago said that Chinese descended people legally qualify as Black. Now, where the court kind of discovered that it works this way, I don't know. It was some kind
but you
of
can get away with that when there's no legal definition for Black.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of a Russian roulette. It's unclear when you can and cannot get away with it. I mean, the Chinese, the People's Republic of China is a very close ally to the South African government, and you might think that maybe this was a calculated move to say that we have to discriminate in favor of these people. But if you're a Russian citizen, if you immigrate to South Africa from Russia, do you qualify as a Black South African? I don't know. I mean, on the same logic of being excluded based on kind of historical disadvantage, Jewish South Africans to some degree have to qualify as Black. Sure, they weren't as disadvantaged as Black South Africans, as obviously Black South Africans, but neither were Coloreds or Indians. And this is something that the more radical elements on the left love to point out, is to say that no, Coloreds and Indians shouldn't be Black because they weren't as oppressed as we were. It's something that Malema and 𝘭𝘍𝘍𝘐 kind of got in trouble for a few years ago. When
I see here's a very pertinent question. VWWA asks, if I have 0.1% Black DNA, can I qualify as Black under the South African regime? We don't know. I mean, if that 0.1% is incredibly visible for some reason, incredibly pronounced in your complexion, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, of course. If it's the visibility is unfortunately the issue here. And yeah, it's actually bizarre because you have people who are supposed to be constitutionalists defending this. They say that what's happening in South Africa is actually good. This is justice. But we can't even get to that advanced of a level of considering whether what we're doing is justice or not if we haven't even taken this very basic step of saying what it is that we are in fact doing. And it just benefits the state. Ultimately, this is a point that I often make when people want to ask me about, well, the Expropriation Act, it's about targeting white people. It's a racial thing about targeting white people. And I'm like, that's the easy way that the state uses to frame it, because they understand that you can get a lot of points out of racial kind of rent seeking in South Africa. But ultimately, everything that this government does is about ultimately empowering the political class to do whatever it wants. I don't think 𝘭𝘍𝘍𝘐 or these people are these hardline kind of Nazis who, like the actual Nazis, read deep books about kind of paganism and kind of Nordic supremacy. I don't think that is the caliber of our enemies. I think they just want to be free to kind of steal and loot and do whatever they want for their own benefit.
And do it with a little bit of a moral sauce poured over it.
Yes. Yeah, they're very good at doing that. This is something you have to give the left credit for. The right, historically and currently, is terrible at PR, but the left is absolutely wonderful at it. They can dress any injustice up in the highest form kind of rhetoric of justice, and they can pull it off, and they do pull it off. But ultimately, what they want to do is rent seek and benefit financially and benefit socially. And in South Africa, the way you do that is to exploit ostensible racial divisions.
Before we get to some of the refutations, quote unquote, fat quotation marks, refutations that have been leveled at this fact of race laws in South Africa, Martin, I just want to read some comments here before we continue. One of the comments here said from Sideliner Opinions, the deeds office now requires a new form of triple L, which clearly states your race and gender for every property transaction. Let Martin explain the challenges thereof. Yes, Martin, is this true? Is it misinformation?
It's probably true. I don't know the details of this, but the housing
I know
act
for a fact that the property market and the estate agent sector is definitely in the eyes of in the targets and crosshairs of the government. That's
yes.
been clear for many years now.
Yeah, so I mean the Deeds Act of 1937 was amended, I think, last year by the Deeds Registries Amendment Act, and in terms of that act, the minister was given the power to record racial demographics of home ownership. So that was a discretion that the minister was given. So clearly, if Sideliner Opinions is correct, and I have no reason to doubt him, the minister has now in fact implemented that discretion. So that is then happening, but it's certainly something that the minister is allowed to do if they so choose. So it doesn't surprise me that this is happening. But yeah, I mean, this runs into all the same kind of trouble that we've discussed. I mean, one of the refutations does get a little bit into this to say that this is just for statistical purposes. Why are you worried? People are like, well, why do you care? It's just we're just recording things. It's not a problem.
We'll get
And
into that
the
now.
reality is, yeah, but the challenge here is
Yeah.
that you can't trust these people. You can't trust what the government is or won't do with your personal information, your personal data. It's really inequitable to empower the state to record things about you on these basis of trust me, bro, you'll be fine. You can't do that.
Right. And then I also want to ask you particularly regarding about 4 very specific laws in South Africa that you explain in detail in the documentary, Is Trump Right About South Africa? We can touch on that documentary as well later in the conversation. But you reference specifically the Employment Equity Act, the Competition Act, the Black Economic Empowerment Act, and the Public Procurement Act. You make the argument in that documentary that these 4 laws create a totality. It makes race law and the racial element or racialist element of these laws inescapable in South Africa. Can you elaborate a bit on that idea? This total race obsession that is enabled by these 4 laws specifically.
Yes. So very brief. Well, I'll try to be brief. But in the 1990s, the a racial dispensation was sold to the country and to the business kind of community on the basis of it being voluntary. To say that we're New South Africa and we want to kind of redress the injustices of the past. So if you're a good business, you will implement some of these things in your business. And, if you don't want to do it, fine, that's okay. We won't force you. We're a free country. That was kind of the implicit premise that undergirded the Employment Equity Act, which came first. And this basically said that at the time it said that you have to adopt an employment equity plan. And effectively, this is your own target. You set the targets. If it's 1% or 2% or 80% or 100%, it's up to you. We're going to kind of help keep you accountable. You submit that plan to the government and we'll kind of remind you about it and kind of give you some benefits for it when you contract with the state. But it's up to you. We're not going to dictate to you how your employment equity plan works. So this is the Employment Equity Act of 1998, affirmative action. This is where affirmative action in the workplace starts. It's a very nice name for a very insidious thing. Then shortly after that comes the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, PPPFA. That act has been repealed by a law of last year, but it's effectively the same thing, which says that when you contract with the state, the contracting entities that you contract with, municipalities, provinces, SOEs, national government departments, they need to look at your racial makeup, your ownership, your staff, your etc. Whatever racial kind of transformed status you have, and the more transformed you are, the more black in that sense you are, the higher your chances of doing business with the state. So that's the preferential procurement policy, doing business with the state. Shortly after that, 2003, the Black Economic Empowerment Act bursts onto the scene, and this has really become almost the deconstitution of race law. This is This is race law prime. This is the key thing.
Mm.
So this is a framework law that manages or sets out the point system. It's a BE point system. It's about how you measure how transformed you are as a business. It has, I think, 5 categories. Ownership is the most important one. I think management and control is another one. Then there's kind of your skills development. Then there's something along the lines of your suppliers. Who do you do business with? And then there's another one, I think, socioeconomic development. And effectively, you get points in each of these categories for the degree to which you are transforming. In ownership, if your ownership is more black, you get more points. In management and control, if your managers and the people who run the business are more black, you get points. If the people you are doing business with are blacker companies, you get more points. If the corporate social investment stuff that you do, the people you donate money to, the kind of charities you engage with are more black, then you get more points. So this is kind of still voluntary. If you don't want points, you don't have to get points. You can kind of go and do your own thing. It's voluntary. It's only for those who want to kind of be good boys in the economy. You can play this game. It's voluntary. And those are kind of so much later last year we got we missed the Competition Act. So the Competition Act, this one is not voluntary. It's been amended a few times, and it says that when the competition authorities, the Competition Commission and the Competition Tribunal, when they have to look at the economy for uncompetitive behavior, like price gouging and kind of all these weird things that big companies do to suppress the little guy, these are many, I'm going to kind of merge these things because they all come down to the same thing. It's kind of price discrimination and other anti-competitive behavior, but it comes down to this. If your anti-competitive behavior disproportionately affects businesses by previously disadvantaged people, then that counts against you more. So if you're doing something that has disadvantaged a Tani who owns a Cook sister business, she's white, it's like, okay, you can't do that, but we will forgive you for now. If it's a Cook sister business by a go-go in a township, you can't do that. We're gonna slap you with a fine. Already there's differential kind of treatment in that respect. But then another thing came a little bit later, which is to do with merging. So companies merge and unmerge all the time. This is kind of how a dynamic business environment works. But in South Africa, you need permission to do that. If you're a big company merging with another big company or a medium company merging with a big company, you need the Competition Commission to approve that. One of the factors that they have to take into account on whether to reject or approve a merger is, does the effect of the merger in that sector reduce the transformed nature of the sector? If yes, then that is a factor that counts against approving the merger. So if let's say 100% black company sit around the table at their board meeting and they say, hey, we want to merge with that 50% white company. We are a 100% black company, we want to merge with that 50% white company because we are businessmen and we do business. The result of that is that a big 100% black company will no longer be a 100% black company. It's going to become I suck at math, a 75% black company, whatever. Now the Competition Commission is going to sit there and think, wow, you can't do that because you're reducing the level of transformedness in your sector. So that's the Competition Act.
You're diluting the blackness.
Exactly, you're diluting the blackness. So it very much disadvantages black businessmen as well, and this is something that's not often pointed out, but I think has to be kind of said because this. But I'll get to that in a minute. And now the Preferential Procurement Act, the Public Procurement Act, has repealed the old Preferential Procurement Act and replaced it with a far more invasive, far more strict preferential procurement policy, and that was adopted just last year. So these are, I think, 4 laws that, in my view, and they've become less voluntary over the last 3 decades, that make it impossible for you to do business in this country as a big business, as a medium business, or as a eenmanszaak, a one-person sole proprietorship, without at some point having to account for something racial. So even on the flawed premise that the BEE points are voluntary, the fact is that if all the big businesses want to do business with the state, and to some degree that follows that your biggest companies in a country are going to have state contracts and they're going to compete with one another to get state contracts, they are all going to want to have the highest BEE score possible to compete. And to push their BEE score as high as they possibly can, they are going to need their own suppliers to do the same thing. If people come to them and say, we want to supply you with product X or with service X, the company is going to turn around and say, cool, give us your BEE certificate. That's a conversation that a lot of business people in this country have. And the company is going to look at the BE certificates, and the one with the highest BE points is going to get the contract. Now, move on from the company doing business with the state. Now we are amongst the second line of smaller companies. To get their points high enough to do business with that company that does business with the state, they need to do the same to their suppliers. And it goes down all the way, right up until you get to the corner shop that supplies sandwiches to the local accountant firm that has their annual general meeting. They are going to need to show that accountant firm that their BE score is higher than the other corner shop. And the result of this, and I've simplified it a lot here, but the result of this is that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter the nature of your business or even non-business. I work for a non-profit organization. It's a non-business, and we have been asked for our BE certificate multiple times over a long period. So it doesn't matter what the nature of your business is or what it is that you do. If you are providing any one of goods and services, if you are making any money, if you're employing anyone, if you have such a thing as owners, or if you are even donating to charity, at some point you are going to have to account for race. You are going to have to tell someone that this is the composition of my board, this is the composition of my family, it's a family business. I'm the owner, my wife is the manager, my son works on the shop floor. They're all white. You are going to have to account for that. So it is impossible, and then I stand by this. It is impossible for you as a businessman in this country or as an investor in this country to get away from the necessity of at some point having to account for race. And that is not just a feature of our society. I mean, you could say that, well, we're a very racially conscious society, so that's okay. It is a legal contrivance. It is something that has been imposed upon our society by law. This is not something that people just do organically in this country. White, black, Indian, colored, it doesn't matter who you are. You do not think about race all the time. Our political class does think about race all the time, and they are forcing you, really, ultimately and effectively forcing everyone else to at some point account for race. So it is a totalitarian system, and our only saving grace is that our government is so incompetent. It is so devoid of smart people, of competent people, that it cannot even enforce a quarter of kind of what is provided for on the books, and they rely entirely upon the cooperation, the willful cooperation of the private sector, and that is a saving grace. We are going to find race everywhere, but not as bad as it could be. And people often try and use this against us. They say, "But you're not suffering. Look at how poorly racial transformation is happening in South Africa." And it's like, yes, the reason that targeted and excluded minorities are not suffering is because they have adapted remarkably well to a very kind of brazen attack on their vital interests, with the added benefit of our opponents, the political class, being just extremely stupid.
And another piece of evidence in regards to I mean, you can still point to minorities in this country being successful, but I mean, when you look at this incredible success rate of minorities that leave South Africa and go live and do business in societies that are not tying a racial shackle around their ankle, they excel completely. They create some of the most phenomenal businesses that new society has ever seen. They become almost instantly catapulted into the elite of that new country. They are just incredibly successful. And I mean, when it comes to particularly that argument, well, you guys are still, you're not destitute yet. White South Africans aren't impoverished yet. That means race laws aren't a problem. No, the fact remains that white South Africans are still managing to carve out a life in South Africa despite all the obstacles that are put in their way. And this is the case for many discriminated against minorities all across the world. They don't just immediately become destitute and the poorest of the poor. They, as you say, they find ways around it. They find ways to adapt to the inhospitable environment, just as just a living organism adapts to his environment that is inhospitable or that threatens him.
Yeah, and it's not because white South Africans are so special or superior beings. It is because, well, you don't have a choice. And this is why minorities that immigrate also excel. Because usually if you immigrate legally, the rule is that if you don't succeed, you're going to go back. We're going to send you back. So you don't really have a choice but to be exemplary if you're an immigrant minority, and that applies to Nigerians leaving. David and Sarah from the FMF always makes the point that Nigerians have a disproportionate kind of influence in certain sectors in the United States where they kind of immigrate to, and even Black South Africans who have immigrated to the US. I know there was a judge in Maryland, for instance. So it's just the nature of being a visible minority, kind of in a not necessarily welcoming environment, in a new environment. And Afrikaners in South Africa used to be very much employed by the state, and in the 90s that changed very rapidly. And you can see on kind of charts of entrepreneurship and income per capita that the end of apartheid meant the skyrocketing of white incomes. Now, why was that? It's not kind of difficult to see why that was. It is that, listen, the government is no longer going to help you, so you need to make it on your own.
And you're being actively purged from the state service.
Yeah, you don't have a choice. I mean, it's either roll over and die or make a success of your life. And people don't tend to want to roll over and die, so they've made a success of their life. And that's, I mean, look at the Black South Africans during apartheid. Richard Maponya, Herman Mashaba, much to kind of, I think, his own shame, he made his great success during the apartheid era. He's now kind of squandered much of that. But why is that? It's because you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. And in those days, townships up to the 70s were far less not deprived, or yes, deprived. There were family units, there were self-defense units, even people organizing themselves because you didn't have a choice. But once the teeth of the state avails itself, and this applies to Black South Africans today just as much as it applied to Afrikaners back in the day, just as much as it applies to Europe, the grand bulk of the European population today. If the teeth of the state avails itself, you're going to want to suck on it, and you are going to become lazy, and you're going to become content in the worst possible way. So no, it's not the fact that you're not suffering doesn't mean that you're not being persecuted. The fact that you're not suffering might in fact, in the presence of these kinds of race laws that I've mentioned, mean that you have just adapted very well because you don't really have a choice. And then we, at our peril, should we make suffering the standard for persecution. Jews around the world, Jews are the nerdy kid in the class who always gets picked on by the bullies. Throughout history, it has been the Jews. And despite that, the Jews have always made a remarkable success of their communities wherever they went, despite the oppression that they've had to endure. So they've always been the richest. They've always been the most successful. And that doesn't mean that they weren't persecuted. That certainly doesn't mean that Afrikaners and racial minorities in South Africa more broadly aren't persecuted. And I'm not saying this just because I happen to be a member of a racial minority. I live comfortably. I feel free. I am a free person in a free society. That does not mean that I am unable to read. the acts of parliament that target people based on their race and exclude people based on their race. So to say that racial minorities in South Africa are persecuted is not to say that they are these hapless victims running for cover under gunfire. It means that there is a legal regime of hostility directed against them. It means nothing more than that. And that in itself, even though they're not suffering, that in itself is evil.
So, Martin, let's get to the refutations part, some of the arguments that have been leveled against you. I want to intro it with one of the comments here from the chat that I wanted to highlight. Ambrose West says, are you people still on these race laws? I thought Dan Corder ended the debate on this on 𝘭𝘢𝘶𝘥𝘦 show. Damn, fantastic piece of satire there, Ambrose, or not. I hope it is. It's something that me and Martin were talking about off air, where it seems that the standard for a lot of these debates is if you just say something with enough snark and enough confidence in your voice, or with enough righteous indignation, it makes you right. I mean, it really has a fascinating effect on people's perception of reality. I mean, when people, for example, one of the criticisms against Ernst Roots in that debate is that he couldn't name any race laws, but he did name, I think, at least 3. From what I can remember, it was just met with a snarky scoff, and therefore it was invalidated, in quotation marks. So, I mean, that's been the quality of the refutation so far. I don't know if your experience has been different, Martin, but my experience so far has been that the refutations are very low quality. It's either screaming that it is misinformation, South Africa has no race laws at all, this is all just a figment of people's imaginations, don't believe your lying eyes, or it is a variant of they do exist, but they are well-intentioned, and they have a smiley sticker on them, so how can they be bad?
No, look, that's true, and that's been true across the board. Because so this is something I said to one of she's an attorney, I think her name is Kelly. She and I had a big kind of debate on X recently, and one of the things I said to her was like, I wouldn't say I'm a public figure, but I kind of wear my face on these shows. I don't have a kind of avatar. My name, you can see it here, it's there. I'm an actual person, I'm not an AI. Would I really, is it really plausible to say that I would just stake my whole reputation on this very easy lie that I just went to kind of parliament and I said, hey guys, give me a long list of laws and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna say they're race laws, it's fine. And I mean, that would be the end of me. Like, that would be such a brazen lie. But and people have tried, and Dan Corder is amongst them. This wasn't his first performance. He did a big rebuttal on his ENCA show a few months ago, where people have tried to go to they convinced themselves this is a lie, and then they went and checked, and then they discovered, much to their astonishment, that no, I did not just say that these random laws are race laws. People are like, ha, the Marriage Act is there. Ha, the Weather Act is there. Why would you include them, you silly boy? And I'm like, yeah, it's very silly that Parliament would racialize laws of that nature. But when they checked, they found that these are, in fact, race laws. So a lot of people still, and it kind of gets to James Myberg's, the thing that you're very familiar with, the kind of 2 channels of communication. And I don't think it's just the ANC that's on this. It's people like Dan Corder. So when he goes on Piers Morgan, kind of, or when he, or the EWN journalist who went to speak to an American TV show, I can't recall which one, but she also went there and said, yeah, there's no race laws in South Africa. So that's the one argument. There are no race laws. It's a lie. It's kind of far-right propaganda. Don't believe that. But then there's the other channel. It's to say, no, race laws are good. And funny enough, they kind of try to maintain in that same channel that they are race conscious, but they're not race laws, kind of something along those lines. They just don't want to concede the term, which is utterly bizarre. But none of them have been able to find a single law. And again, there might be laws that are not racial that were included by mistake. I am
But they've not been
perfectly
pointed. If
open.
those exist, they've not
Yes,
been pointed out.
they have not been pointed out, and I'm desperate for them to be pointed out because I have a very real vested interest in this thing being as accurate as it possibly can be. But up to now, they have not been pointed out, and every time someone has pointed out one, I went to check. So Caitlin Rawson, and I want to give her credit because she actually put in the work to go and read some of these acts, and she found that some of them did not have racial provisions, and I was like, okay, geez, I need to check this out. And I found that in fact they did have racial provisions because they were amended in afterwards. They were amended acts into racial provisions. But I was very happy that she did this work and pointed that out. But no one has been able to point me yet to a law in this list, in this index, that does not contain a racial provision. Anton Harber is often cited as someone who has blown the index out of the water, and I had long email correspondences with him. I used to consider him kind of broadly on my side of the debate as a non-racialist and so on, but he's kind of squandered that. But he began emailing me a while back, asking me identified specific acts, and he said da 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 da, and I went back to him and I said, "Here's the racial provision." I gave him each racial provision, and then he wrote his rebuttal and effectively said, yes, they're racial, but they're well-intentioned. They have good vibes, and this is really what it comes down to. And as you and I were kind of chatting before, and I'm okay with that. I am okay with us having that debate about whether are race laws justified or aren't they justified. The very smart people have made very smart arguments in favor of race laws. I oppose all of them. I disagree with them, and I can make an argument against them.
But there's an actual debate of substance to
yes,
be had there.
exactly. We're having a conversation with each other. We're talking about the same thing. They say race law good, I say race law bad, and now it's the battle of ideas. And I want to have that conversation, but I cannot go to that conversation until we acknowledge that we are in fact dealing with race laws. And that is the kind of thing where this discourse is stuck, because people want to force us into a debate about race. They want to have a debate about how good race laws are. They want to say how good race laws are while saying we have no race laws. And I'm old-fashioned. I'm a modernist. I'm not a pre-modernist like Edmund Burke maybe was. So I'm very much in that mode of a liberal modernist. I need to understand the concept, a defined concept that I'm working with, and we like terms need to be defined, and the debate needs to some degree be formal. We need to know what we're talking about. It cannot be this postmodern thing about as the situation develops. And as our feelings around it develop, the terms will change their meaning. I cannot do that. So I have been very insistent, and I know it's been annoying a lot of people, especially from News 24, ENCA, where I keep saying, I'm not going to go into the argument about whether these laws are good or bad. These laws exist, and they do create disabilities and advantages based on people's melanin content. The second that we're all ad idem, the second that we're all agreed about that, and I naively thought that we all did agree about that, but since the beginning of this year, this whole kind of thing exploded. Until we agree about that, I don't think the debate can move on, because then we're just lying. We're just lying, and I think we're lying to the rest of the world, because as South Africans for decades we've been talking about BE, we've been talking about racial empowerment for decades, and now the international community is interested, and now suddenly, no, there's no racial policy in South Africa. So there is a very deceitful thing going on here that's about woodwinking the foreigners who are now taking an interest again in what South Africa is doing about race. And then we need to my message to these people is lean into it. Just if you believe in race law, say it with full-throated conviction.
Say it with your chest. Say, I am
Exactly.
pro-discrimination. I am pro-positive discriminatory laws. And then we can have a debate on whether they are actually positive or not. But
yeah, exactly.
They want their cake and eat it too. They want to be non-racialists and at the same time also like, yeah, but this form of discrimination is actually a good thing.
Mm. No, it's really bizarre, and it's an impossible debate. That's why the thing with Ernst Rutz and Dan Corder is it's so difficult to kind of like if I were there. So some people have said no, I should have been on there to defend the index of race law. I don't know how I would have reacted to this conversation effectively being there are no race laws, but let
Yeah.
me, as Dan Corder, tell you why our race laws are so good. There are
Mm.
no race laws, but I'm going to defend our race laws.
Right.
It does not
It's
work,
it's
and
the
that's what
debate
he's been doing.
regarding. It's basically saying let's have a discussion on whether the sky is beautiful or not, but you can't agree on whether the sky is red or blue.
Yes.
We first have to get out of the way. Do we see the same sky? Do we both agree the sky is the same color? Then we can debate on whether it's a beautiful or an ugly sky. But
No, exactly that.
what the pro discrimination South Africans are doing. So on the one side they're like the sky is red, and then on the other side they want to have the discussion on, well, look at this beautiful red sky. It's such a beautiful thing, but they don't want the debate to be focused or fixated on that fact. They want to focus, depending on the context, on whether the sky is red or blue. They want to say, well, when the audience is very skeptical, the audience is very critical, they will come out and say, no, there's actually no race laws in South Africa. But when the audience is a bit more left wing, when the audience is a bit more pro discrimination, they will come out very with their chest and say, no, these are positive things. I mean, you saw this happen with the president, with Cyril Ramaphosa. When he's sitting in front of Donald Trump, he says, no, we condemn kill the Boer, and there's no race laws in South Africa. And then he comes back to South Africa, and as soon as he's in front of the friendly media once again, and as soon as he's in his comfort zone, then it's no, we are staunch defenders of the kill the Boer chant. I'm not going to condemn it under any circumstances, and we are going to continue. The race laws in South Africa will continue until whatever criteria the ANC decides
Utopia.
on. Until
Yeah, he
utopia.
said we will continue to have race in our law. We'll continue to use race-based terms, he said, in our laws until we are all equal. And I mean, that sounds nice as kind of a dismissive, kind of offhanded remark, but until we're all equal, my goodness. Jeez,
But I mean,
show me
that's
one
one of the
society.
other that's one of the other elements as well in the refutation side of this argument about race laws, is the fact that people say, well, these laws don't have scary names. I pressed Control F and I couldn't find the word evil anywhere in this legislation. So how can it be bad? It's called literally the Prosperity Act and the Beautiful Things Act and the Lacquer Things Act and the Good Things Act. How can you be against? Are you against prosperity? Are you against good things? Are you against empowerment? Are you against upliftment of people, you monster? I'm like, well, yes, and yes, the Patriot Act is very patriotic indeed. So I mean, that's the ANC has played a fantastic PR game, as you said earlier as well. I mean, that because then they can fall back on that. They give these discriminatory laws beautiful names, and then if you attack the law or criticize the law, say, well, how can you be against good things? It's the Good Things Act after all.
Yeah.
But I mean, you just have to push through that. You just have to say, no, well, I judge a tree on its fruit. I judge a law on its contents, not on its intentions or on its name.
No, exactly, and the very same people in any other circumstances would agree. Like these are the people who would say, "Oh yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions." This is a thing that they would say, that they would pretend to agree with. But then when it gets to race law, they would say, "No, no, but you see, these laws are intended to uplift." And I've gotten in trouble for this a lot, and I've gotten in trouble about this with my fellow liberals. As many of your followers will know, I'm a classical liberal, individualist, kind of through and through. And other liberals get very upset with me when I say this, but don't tell anyone. But yeah, apartheid also had good intentions. Like Hendrik Verwoerd, I think, is one of the kind of most sophisticated authoritarians of our time. But he didn't go to bed at night thinking, yes, I'm really going to get the blacks now. Like
I got to
that
step up
did
my
not
game in
happen.
being evil.
Exactly. Yeah, the Malan and Jan Smets and these people didn't think, yes, we're really getting those blacks, we're really showing them how we're going to whip them. That is not how it worked. These people, misguided as I think they absolutely were, based on, I think, a very problematic political philosophy that emphasized authority over freedom, very problematic as that might be, they did not have bad intentions. They did not want to harm people. They thought that what they were doing was good. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that what they were doing was not good, and we must judge it on the basis of the actual content of what they did. And everyone agrees about this. Everyone agrees. But suddenly, now we're in 2025. No, you see, the Gas Act, Mighty Jamie's pet law. He kept saying, "Oh, it's why is the Gas Act in this list? That's ridiculous." It's like, yeah, the Gas Act. The Gas Act is also there, and it says we have to do all these wonderful things in the gas industry to promote transformation. Yes, it has good intentions. Wonderful. I do not care, and nobody should care. The fact is, this is a race law. This is a law that at some point in its operations make someone's race a legally relevant fact. And it probably doesn't work. So it's not even about judging a law just by its consequences. It's judging a law by its nature, its visa, what it is, its character. It is a race law. So let's start there. And then, of course, we must look at what its consequences are. And then maybe we can look into that people have bad intentions when they try to implement this bad law. But you cannot front load everything with, my goodness, it's all about intentions. And our courts are very guilty in this as well. They are the ones who said that if your laws are based on, if the empowerment laws are designed to do good things, we're not even going to inquire into whether they are racially discriminatory. They are shielded, they have plot armor. You cannot do anything against these laws because they have good intentions. So even our courts have fallen into this atrociously bad trap. You don't even have to be a conservative or a liberal or a socialist to agree with the basic premise that you cannot judge interventions and laws by the intentions of their framers. Simple.
Absolutely. And I mean, it also comes down to that point that when people talk about these discriminatory laws in terms of transformation, I mean, you have to, once again, you can't just take the term on face value. You have to dig a bit deeper, look under the hood. What transformation in what sense? Well, demographic transformation, racial transformation, that's the end. How do you achieve racial transformation of a sector, of a business, of a society? Through discriminatory ends. It's baked into the cake. It's impossible to ignore that fact. It's also impossible to have it any other way. You can't racially transform anything without racially discriminating. It's not possible. That's the way these laws work. The means are baked into the ends that are being pursued.
No, exactly. And again, if that is something you want to do, then fine. We're going to be opponents, we're going to be enemies, but at least we're going to have a shared respect that each of us is honestly pursuing our agenda. But currently, we can't even get there. We can't even get there because everything is premised on deceit. And I mean, as I kind of told the News 24 people when they did their first kind of full report on the index of race law, it's that we have answers to the empowerment question. It's not like this is always the thing that's put at our feet. It's to say that, well, yeah, you oppose race laws because you don't actually have a solution to South Africa's kind of poverty and inequality and so on, and you just want to protect white privilege. It's like, no. Actually, we do have answers. Like South Africa is called this miracle nation, but believe it or not, there are many countries around the world that have actually solved some of these problems, and they've done it decades ago, and many of them are post-colonial states. And so we have answers to all these things. If you want to reduce inequality, racial inequality, there are ways to do that. If you want to reduce poverty, there are ways to do that, and we can talk about all those things. You want to do it racially. You want to discriminate against people based on their race. That's a very specific ideology of social engineering that you have bought into. And we need to talk about the fact that you want to do that, but you are not even willing to acknowledge that that is what you are doing. It is treating race-based empowerment as if it's the only game in town. And I mean, that's just on its face a ridiculous proposition. This notion that all the rich countries in the world somehow got there by saying that by treating you racially. No, if the rich countries have gotten there through very tried and tested, very quantifiable means that we can very easily replicate in South Africa, if that is what we want. That is what some of us want. But the cheerleaders for the regime, they're not interested in that. They're interested in neat little academic formulas of ratios and kind of, if you're 7% of the population, then you're only allowed to have 7% of the cook sister businesses. And if you have 4% of the population, you're only allowed to kind of have 4% of this, that, or the other. But no, I mean, the example I always go back to is Koreans in New York City. Now, I think New York City's economy is probably bigger than our entire country's. In New York City, Koreans own the vast majority of nail salons. Is that a problem? Are we agreed that this disproportionate ownership by Korean Americans of nail salons in New York City is now an issue that must be resolved through race law? Well, I'm sure some South Africans might think so, but the Americans clearly don't think so. They're not bothered by that. That's just kind of, no, we're all kind of happy with it being that way because we value freedom in this country. And our argument, and I think many sensible people's argument is that, hey, freedom actually does work. If we chose freedom after apartheid, we would probably have been a far less unequal, far more prosperous society in general than having chosen this path of racial engineering, whereby businesses that could be making huge developments, huge infrastructure investments, huge kind of employment drives, now have to sit around tables thinking about how they're going to racially engineer this, that, or the other. We had ESCOM in the early 2010s hiring a massive workforce, like a huge expansion of ESCOM's workforce in those years. I think it's 2010, 2012, 2014, thereabouts, for no reason other than, oh goodness, we had this employment equity target and we had to meet it, otherwise we would be punished by the Employment Equity Commission. So ESCOM made its own product more expensive, and then we had load shedding again a few years later after it fired many of its kind of competent white engineers as well. So it's like we're playing these little games with neat little formulas about what the ratios are, when we could just be doing the relatively easy work, I would submit, very relatively easy work of development, of economic growth, and just of prosperity. It's something that's within grasp, but we insist as a society on playing these games.
So there's one comment I want to read here before we start wrapping up. So Dylan Creer says, the point Dan Corder actually ended up making is, the laws don't just discriminate on race. It's way worse. It discriminates against everyone. Destroyed. Good thing that was cleared up. Yes. But he said it with a snarky tone, therefore it's true.
Yeah, I mean, he said, sorry, just, I mean, the thing, Corder wasn't the first person to do this. Like before that as well, as people have said, yeah, it's the race is there, but look, it says disability and gender, and it's like, so what? Like it's if you look at the Companies Act, for instance, it says some things about sequestrated directors. You cannot be appointed as a director to a company if you are sequestrated. Okay, so is sequestration now no longer part of insolvency law because it's in the Companies Act? Is that now how it works? So you cannot have a race law and a gender law and a disability law. These things cannot now coexist. Yeah, of course. If I were creating a index of laws that speak to disability, then that would also be included, of course. If it is based on gender discrimination, that would also be included. But this is an index of race law, and if it in any way, shape, or form makes race legally relevant, in addition to other things, of course, it will be included.
All right, and then there's just two questions I want to briefly answer. I'm going to answer them under correction, Martin. You can say if I'm correct or not. Grasshopper asks, how many of those 140 race laws are old apartheid laws? 116 of them are new, or post 1994. That's correct.
117 are adopted post 94, and there is a handful that or in addition to that, that amended
Mm.
apartheid era laws. But there are a few, like the Marriage Act, that are still racial from the adoption from the apartheid era, and like the Bethelsdorp Settlement Act, it's a very small number of apartheid era laws that are still on the books and still racial, but these are dead letters, so they don't do anything. You can't enforce their racial provisions anymore, and no one is going to enforce the racial provisions anymore. So yeah, there's a very small number of them, and if you want to see on the index of race law how that works, just go to it and look at the years, and then look at the operative status, and you'll see that there's only a handful of them from pre-94 that are still operative.
Right. And then a quick question here from Dion, who asks, have you spoken about people of Chinese descent that got their classification changed to black here in South Africa? Yes, we did cover it earlier in this chat. Martin, I want to start wrapping up here just with one thought that I think is very important. We talked about it in the lead up to this conversation. That's the fact that the zeitgeist in South Africa is very clearly changing. I mean, I remember still when it was absolutely taboo to be in criticizing BEE or racially discriminatory laws in South Africa in any way. The resistance or the defense from pro-discrimination South Africans was actually quite robust. Not robust in the sense that their arguments were better, but they were much more confident and much more assured in the righteousness of their mission. Now today, I can turn on the radio, I can turn on the television, and people are critically debating these race laws on television, on panels, on radio. There's still a lot of pro-discrimination defenders, but there's a lot of critical voices as well saying it's now time to wrap it up. It's time to move on from racially discriminatory laws in this country. And that is a very clear zeitgeist shift. It's actually, I think if you view it in the bigger picture, you might not see it in the short term, but in the bigger picture, if you look at it on a 30-year time scale, it's quite a big change in the zeitgeist. It gives you a little bit of whiplash compared to how we were talking about these race laws even as early as 10 years ago, maybe. I mean, have you seen that same change in the discourse?
Absolutely, and I think there are probably two, maybe more things that can explain this. I think the first thing and the simplest thing is that we are now moving we're moving into the second generation after apartheid, and that's kind of the generation that you and I are from. Now, with respect to our parents and people of their generation, they felt a measure of guilt, I think, for what happened. And I think that maybe there's something to be said for that, for some level of collective introspection, that our generation and previous generations comes from a time of racial oppression, and we must account to some degree for that. Maybe there's something to be said for that. I'm not sure, maybe not. But certainly for us, and man, absolutely for our children, there is no way in hell that it can stand that we need to bear responsibility for things that were done before we even drew breath. And I think this generation becoming adults, becoming active participants in the discourse, is contributing to this, to say that no, listen, we get that these things are well intentioned, and we agree that the past wasn't just moonshine and roses, but we can solve this problem together, or you can go and get stuffed, because I'm not just going to lay over for you to beat me up. So that's the one thing. The other thing is Jacob Zuma, Easter. I think Jacob Zuma is a very underrated president of South Africa, because he did a lot of good work in taking the Mandela and Mbeki veneer of respectability that existed over kind of the Transformania race law regime, and he just took a sledgehammer to it. He said that I'm going to use these laws to benefit my buddies, I'm going to use these laws to benefit my family, I'm going to use these laws to enrich myself. And thank you, President Zuma, because I think without Zuma, if we had Mandela, Mbeki, and then Ramaphosa, we would still probably be suffering from a lot of that kind of, it's not perfect, but we have to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to these laws. But the Zuma era made it so obvious, and I think even to people on the left in the media, that hey, these laws actually can be and are abused, like those radical far right extremists have been saying that they can be. So I think these two things actually came together quite well. That the post apartheid generations, the so-called born frees, we're not all just kind of willing to be the sacrificial lambs in someone else's ideological game. We actually do have families, we do have interests. We're not willing to accept the premise that we must now be poor and must suffer because of something bad that happened in the past. I think most of us are eager to make life better for our fellow South Africans, but not at the expense of our own children. That's just not going to happen. It's a non-starter. I think that's a key driver. And the other one is that we had a good 8 years of very in your face rent seeking by the state. And Ramaphosa has tried to roll that back. And I think in his attempts, he has made it so much worse, our current president. And for that, I must also thank him for being so absolutely clueless at regaining that old lost Mandela magic. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think the global political situation is also somewhat shifting. I think the Trump thing plays a little bit into that. I think it's backfiring a bit if you look at the Australian elections and the Canadian elections to some degree. But I think in a more cultural and social respect rather than a purely partisan respect, it is having an effect that there is a kind of a pushback against the leftist orthodoxy that has come to dominate in the past few decades. So yeah, the zeitgeist has shifted. I still think we're losing, but I think the shift in the zeitgeist is a good thing, and the opportunity is there for people on our side to grab really, and just take advantage of the current moment, make your voice heard. Don't be afraid of speaking the truth, and maybe more basically, don't allow yourself to be gaslit by people who say obviously untrue things, just in a sophisticated tone with a large bold all caps fact check in front of it. So just be careful.
No, I think that's a fantastic way to end our conversation here tonight, Martin. Thank you very much for those insights in where we find ourselves today in the debate. I mean, I also think that we find ourselves in a time, if you look at all the chaos around us, the instability around us, the intensity of the rhetoric, changes in the air. The possibility of change is very strong, and things are going to change, but whether that's positive or negative change, that's going to depend on our actions and how we respond to this opportunity and how we grab this opportunity. So I think there's still time to really make a proper assault against these race laws in South Africa. One comment I want to read before we say goodbye. Sideliner Opinion says, thank you, Martin, for the monumental work you did in this regard. Your efforts have been rewarded. People are now talking about the elephant on the coffee table. Yes, and I mean, there is a little domino sequence between your index of race law and Elon Musk, the richest and one of the probably the most famous man in the world, talking about the 140 race laws in South Africa. That's a fantastic achievement, and that's also contributing to this changing of the changing of the direction of the wind. Let's just see if we can adjust our sails accordingly to benefit from it as opportunely as possible. But Martin, thank you very much for the work that you do. Best of luck with your continued work in this regard, in this fight. And then thank you to everyone that tuned in. If you want to read more of what Martin is doing, I put the links to everything we talked about in the description. And if you haven't watched it yet, go watch our documentary, AfriForum's documentary, Is Trump Right About South Africa? We also do a deep dive there into the race laws of South Africa with the help of Martin here. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you guys have a fantastic week ahead. And as I said, if you want to go follow Martin on social media, all the links are in the description. He regularly comments on the things happening around us here, specifically in South Africa. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice week, and I'll see you next week. Cheers. Have a good one, and God bless.
Cheerio.